for a second, I thought that was not for me. That was overly glorified. Don't trust anything what he says. I appreciate everyone. Thank you very much. My name is Bal Joshi. 10 years. In Nepali, I would say Buddha Bhaiya. In English, I would say we are getting old. This chamber, 2012, around same this time, summer of 2012, Nepalese Society of Texas had a first meeting for their executive board, and I was fortunate to be part of that group. The idea of establishing Chamber of Commerce started. We did not know whether it's a chamber or some other capacity. We just knew that we needed something to connect, unite, empower our entrepreneurs. After 2 years of work, we launched. At that time, we called it Yeti Chamber of Commerce, and then later on, it became Nepalese American Chamber of Commerce. We thank you so much. We thank all of our members, our supporters, our like members, our guests, most importantly for this event, our sponsors, our platinum sponsor, our social hour sponsor, our silver sponsor, and of course we will go through, we'll hear their names in a second. We thank you very much. As we introduce our keynote speaker, he is someone, we'll hear his story in a second, but he is someone that you can actually count on. Like, there are very few people at his caliber in the world. He's the first American to conquer all the 14 peaks in the world, 8,000 feet, 8,000 meters above, 14 peaks. First American. 5 American, I believe there are 5 people on the planet that have done it. Most importantly, this man has conquered these 14 peaks without oxygen. He stood up on the top of the world, literally, not metaphorically, literally, not once, not twice, 7 times. He understands the value of climbing up, summiting a mountain, but he also understands the importance to know how to climb down, how to get down from the top. He understands, just like our entrepreneurs, you achieve so much success in your life. You reach the summit, and then what? Do you have an answer as you're traveling your journey? This question is to all of my entrepreneurs. You do not have to answer this right now, but please do think about it. As I am climbing this mountain of my business, my life, do I have the skill, willingness to stay at the top? Or if needed, come down without an accident, without a crash? This is what we're going to learn today. Ladies and gentlemen, it's my honor and privilege to introduce the keynote speaker of the night, Mr. Ed Viesturs. Ed, please. Welcome.
Namaste.
I have to catch my breath because there's some steps I had to climb. It's very nice to be here, and we'll begin with the first slide, if it's available. Harder than climbing a mountain. Yeah. Advancing. There we go. Let's go back. That's what I wanted to start with. You know, I dedicated my adult life to climbing mountains and traveled the world. And the question I get all the time with, well, what's my favorite country to travel to climb? And honestly, it's Nepal. Nepal is a beautiful country. You know that. I've been there over 20 times, and I have a lot of great memories. And one of my best memories and one of my favorite photos is this photo that I took on one of my ascents to the summit of Everest. And this is a few hundred feet from the summit. The sun is just rising behind me, and what you see here is the shadow of Everest on the atmosphere. And there's the moon rising above. One of my favorite memories. And I've been doing this now, climbing big mountains. I started over 40 years ago. And what a lot of people ask me all the time is, why do I do this? What do I like about it? How can I dedicate my life to this? And the simple answer to me, for me, is I like it because it's hard. I like things that are challenging. I like the planning, the preparation, and to get ready for a Himalayan expedition, it takes 8 to 10 months just to get ready. And that's doing the homework. And it's always my fear of failure that is my motivator. Because when I'm on one of these big mountains, where I spend 3 months trying to climb to the top for one mountain, the mountain doesn't just let me climb to the top. It is very relentless. It pushes. And because of that, I've learned how to push. I've learned how to be stubborn and patient and just be willing to be uncomfortable. But there's never a guarantee of success. No matter how much you plan or prepare or invest, there's no guarantee of success in the mountains. But when you do stand on the summit, that's an amazing feeling. This is the summit of Makalu, the 5th highest peak in the world, also in Nepal, just under 28,000 feet. And when you get to the top, you look back on that investment, the time and the energy, and then you understand that it was truly worth that. And that to me is very addicting, and that's why I've been doing it for so long. But again, there's never a guarantee of success, but what there is a guarantee of risk. And one of the things I didn't know I would learn was how to be a risk manager. There's dangers in the mountains, things that can get you, things that can kill you. Avalanches, storms, rockfall, crevasses. And people think that we seek the risk. In fact, we don't. We try to manage the risk. And the biggest factor of risk is ambition and arrogance. And a lot of people push further than they should on a given expedition, and a lot of those people don't come home because of the investment. And I love climbing, but I decided a long time ago what I like more is being alive. And I've always thought that when you go to climb a mountain, it has to be a round trip, right? And you have to learn how to temper your ambition in the face of risk. So how did I start climbing? I read this book. Growing up, it was in high school when I read this book in the great mountaineering state of Illinois. That's where I grew up. And this is a story that took place in 1950 on this mountain called Annapurna, also in Nepal. Annapurna is the 10th highest mountain in the world, one of only 14 peaks in the world over 8,000 meters. And this is the Himalaya range. The northern border of Nepal with Tibet, all the way to Pakistan, and eastern Nepal bordering with Bhutan. And in 1950, a group of climbers from France went to try to climb Annapurna. None of the other 8,000 meter peaks had yet been climbed, not even Everest, although it had been attempted since the 20s. And this small group of climbers literally stepped off the map, and they spent 3 months together on this mountain through trial and tribulation, through great leadership, great teamwork, and in the end, they succeeded. Huge victory, the first 8,000 meter peak climb. And only two of the team got to the summit. And I'll talk about the logistics of that. You go as a group, you collaborate, you coordinate, and in the end, you know that only 1 or 2 of you are actually going to stand on the top. And that's how the logistics of these expeditions work. I was so inspired by this story. I thought to myself, that is something I want to do. I want to go climb Annapurna. I want to go climb Everest. And I certainly knew that wasn't going to happen overnight, right? In the flattest state of the Union, how long is that going to take? And I gave myself 10 years. I said, if I start tomorrow, training, learning, gaining experience, taking all those necessary steps, maybe in 10 years, I'll have the opportunity to try to go to Everest or one of these other big peaks. A lot of steps I had to take. Obviously, the first step I had to take was to get the hell out of Illinois. So right out of high school, I moved to Seattle, Washington. And if you've seen Seattle, it's a beautiful city surrounded by mountains. And so many great American Himalayan climbers started in the Pacific Northwest. And that's why I moved to Seattle. So climbing I thought would be my hobby, but what would be my career path? I already knew as a kid what I wanted to do. I wanted to be a veterinarian. So I put myself through college. I went 4 years, University of Washington, got a degree, and then 4 more years medical school at Washington State. And in all of my free time, I went climbing. And I focused a lot of my attention on the mountain we can see from downtown Seattle. This is Mount Rainier, 14,400 feet high. And this literally became my classroom because it had all the elements of a Himalayan mountain. It had altitude, it had terrible weather, it had crevasses and glaciers and steep terrain. And so I thought this would be a perfect stepping stone to take me to something bigger. And the big thing I had to do as well was to learn the art of mountaineering. And I literally became an apprentice, started to learn. I found people that were willing to take me and teach me, and I went and I learned and I watched and I listened. And one of the first things I learned was how we connect to each other physically with a rope. We are physically connected, but that implies implicit trust. And when you rope up to 1 or 2 or 3 other people, you safeguard each other, and you're stronger. And we call that the brotherhood of the rope. After several years of climbing and learning the basics, I then got a job as a guide on Mount Rainier. I started working there in 1982, and I worked there for 10 years. And it wasn't as if I thought I was going to be a guide my whole life, but I knew I would gain experience being on the mountain every day, every summer for 10 years. And more importantly, I had senior guides that were my teachers and my mentors. And one of the things I learned as well as a guide was not only was I taking care of myself, I had to think about the safety of my clients, the customers that come to us. And our number one rule in customer satisfaction is to keep our customer alive, right? Everything else was secondary. We want to have them get a great experience. And if we can, obviously, our goal is to try to help them reach the summit of Mount Rainier. One of the biggest lessons I learned as well was, in spite of how far we travel, in spite of how much money we pay or how much shiny new equipment we just bought at REI, that doesn't guarantee that we get to go to the summit of any mountain in the world. The mountain actually decides. The weather, the temperament, the strength of the group, the wind conditions, the depth of the snow. And we as guides have to be observing this in the moment. Rather than waiting for something to happen, we try to predict if it might happen and we pull the plug before it's too soon. So taking in all that information and making a decision is something that we call listening to the mountain. And it's obviously the mountain that decides what we get to do. And for me, that was the biggest lesson of my guiding career. And I think it kept me alive throughout the rest of my career as well. Because of my guiding, then I got to guide all over the world. And I started climbing higher and higher mountains. I started gaining more experience. And eventually I started to think maybe climbing Mount Everest could be a possibility. The highest point on Earth, 29,000 feet high. On the summit of which there's only a third the amount of oxygen as there is at sea level. Everest wasn't first climbed until 1953 by the British. Edmund Hillary and the Sherpa Tenzing Norgay were the very first 2 people to stand on the summit. And that expedition that took place in 1953, there were 40 people involved for 3 months working together on that mountain, and in the end, 2 people reached the summit. Once again, teamwork was that primary ingredient. Second to that, when you're climbing to 29,000 feet, you need something to help your body go to that altitude. And that's where supplemental oxygen comes into play. And I think because the first ascent was done with oxygen, it kind of became the standard or the norm. And even today, 99.9% of all the people that climb Everest use oxygen. And I don't have anything against oxygen. What it does, though, in relative terms, is it reduces the relative altitude of the mountain by 10,000 feet. Sorry, I've got to stay hydrated. I started to think, though, personally, if I'm going to go to a mountain that's 29,000 feet, why would I want to reduce its altitude just so I could say I could stand on the summit? So my personal rule, my personal goal was not to use oxygen. I knew it'd be harder, I'd have to train more, suffer a little bit more, but in the end I thought it would be in fairness to the mountain and also more rewarding. And that was a hard, fast rule for me. And second to that, I thought it'd be way cheaper, right? I wouldn't have to buy the oxygen. So I kept climbing, and lo and behold, 10 years into my career, I got invited to go on my very first Himalayan expedition. So my plan paid off. And that invitation was to go and try to climb Everest. So 1987, this was my very, very first visit to Nepal, to Kathmandu. And even though we would be climbing on the north side, the Tibetan side, we would journey through Nepal. We spent some time in the Khumbu, acclimatizing, one of the most beautiful places in the world. And eventually we got to Everest Base Camp on the Chinese side of the mountain. This is Everest Base Camp, and it's at 18,000 feet. This now becomes your home away from home, literally for 3 months. From base camp, you can't go all the way to the summit in one day. Eventually, it's going to take 5 days of climbing to get to the summit. But before you can even consider that, we have to build 4 camps on the mountain before we can even consider going to the summit. And the building of camps and the carrying of all the supplies to those camps is what takes up the bulk of the expedition. Up to 2 months of effort of us as a team carrying loads on our back, 40, 50, 60 pounds, day in and day, up and back and forth from base camp. And for the first 10 days or so, we carried loads just to establish Camp 1. Up and down, back and forth, over and over, over and over. Eventually, we get Camp 1 established. We move into that camp, and then we start the process of carrying loads and establishing Camp 2. As we go higher, because of the lack of oxygen, the amount of weight that we can physically carry decreases until the end, as we're approaching Camp 4, which is going to be at 27,000 feet. It's all we can do to carry 20 pounds each, rather than 60 pounds. And the camps get smaller, and the amount of supplies in each camp decreases to the point where Camp 4, that launch camp, ends up being one tiny tent with just enough supplies for 2 people. And that's how the logistics of this worked out. Exactly in 1953, they got one little tent set up for 2 people to go to the summit. So that's 2 months of effort, 2 months of being in the process of getting the mountain set up. We then go back to base camp. We try to recover a little bit. We've now been exhausted by all that effort. And the leader looks around the room because we know we're going to send just 2 people back all the way to Camp 4. And then on that 5th and final day, hopefully, they'll go to the summit. The hardest day by far is still ahead of us. Motivation goes away. Patience goes away. We've lost 10 or 15 pounds. And the leader looks around the room, we have a meeting, and he goes, who wants to go to the summit? Nobody raises their hand. By now, you just want to go home, right? All the motivation you had in the bar 6 months ago is gone. How do you pick the 2 people now that are going to climb to the summit? It's based on 3 things. Who's still strong, who's still motivated, and more importantly, who has contributed during that event. I was one of the 2 people selected. And so I go with my partner, we leave base camp once again. We climb all the way back up to Camp 4, 27,000 feet, camped above the clouds, very beautiful, and we spend a very short night. Because the next morning, we're out the door at 2 o'clock in the morning. We start the climb with headlamps. It's 30 below zero. And the reason we start so early is we know from that camp, it's going to take 12 hours just to get to the summit, let alone 5 or 6 hours to get back. That's an 18-hour day. And that's the reason we start so early. For the first 10 hours of that day, things were going great. We finally get to within 300 feet of the summit. And at that point, we knew that last 300 feet, believe it or not, still takes 2 hours of climbing because you're going so slowly. And the weather started to change. A storm was imminent, and it got worse and worse by the minute. And we thought during that next 2 hours on our way to the summit, we might get to the top, but we would probably not survive the descent. And based on risk, and based on that perception of what could happen, we stopped, and we turned around, and we went home. 300 feet from the summit. And imagine doing that. And imagine what most other people in that situation do. Time, energy, investment, expectation. They're not going to turn around. And that's what kills people in the mountains. And I was very proud about making that decision. You know, we listened to the mountain. That's a rule that I'd learned and a rule that I didn't break. And I knew that mountain was going to be there for a long time. And I could go back. And I went back the next year. And I had another non-success based on bad weather. I don't call these failures because if you try your best and if something prevents you from succeeding, I don't think that's a failure. It's just a non-success. It wasn't then until my 3rd trip to Everest that I finally had success. This was in the spring of 1990. And on that final summit day from high camp, I was alone. Just the way the logistics of that climb worked out. And I was okay with being alone up there. I had the skill set to climb without being on a rope. But the hard part about being alone for 12 hours, going uphill in deep snow, is that you're alone, right? Nobody to make decisions with, nobody to break trail with, nobody to motivate with. And ultimately, in the end, looking back on it, that was the hardest day of my life, both physically and mentally. Imagine for 12 hours, for every step you take, you stand there and you breathe 15 times. You take another step, you stand there and you breathe 15 times. And that goes on, and it's a struggle. And about 8 or 10 hours into that day, you're kind of asking yourself, why am I doing this, right? And you start to think about quitting. I can make up an excuse and I can quit. Quitting's easy though. And I had no legitimate reason to quit. So I kept going, kept going, kept going. 12 hours later, I took those last steps and I was at the top of the world. I was alone on the summit of Everest, looking down on every other mountain on Earth. What an amazing feeling, and so cool to be up there alone. But the bad part was I thought, well, who's going to take my picture, right? So I had an idea. I had an ice axe with me, and I stuck it in the snow vertically, balanced my camera on top, set the timer, let it go off, heard the camera go click. This was film, not digital. And it wasn't until a month later I had the film developed, and I saw that I got my own selfie then on the summit of Everest. And truly one of the highlights of my life, to finally having climbed Everest without oxygen. And since that point, I've climbed to the summit. Thank you. And I've climbed it 6 more times because I forgot what the first time was like. So what do you do next? You think, wow, that's the pinnacle of a mountaineering career for most people. But I thought, no, I want to keep going. I love this. So my next goal was to climb the 3rd highest peak. This is a mountain in eastern Nepal called Kanchenjunga. It's only 800 feet lower than Everest, but technically harder. 3,000 feet of ice that we had to climb on our way to the summit. And 2.5 months later, 3 of us stood on the summit of Kanchenjunga. And a lot of people ask, how long do you stay up there? You know, it depends on the weather, time of day. Beautiful day here, we stayed for about an hour. This little island in the sky, roughly at cruising altitude of a jet. So on your next business trip, when you're at cruising altitude, look out the window and see a couple guys up there waving at you. That's where we're hanging out. And from the summit, we can look 80 miles to the west, and there, just left of center, is Everest. So you feel like celebrating on the summit, but I've always felt it's premature because you're really only half done with what you came to do. You still have to go down. And a lot of people lose sight of that. They use all of their resources, all of their energy just to get to the summit. And then they have to make it up coming down. And most accidents actually occur not on the way up, but on the way down. And for me, that's the most important part of any climb. Getting to the summit is optional, getting down is mandatory. So now I have the two of the 3 highest peaks in the world climbed. And I thought, how do I elevate myself now? How do I push myself even further? And we have what we call the holy grail of mountaineering. This is a mountain called K2 in Pakistan, very rarely successfully climbed. And it's steep and the weather's unpredictable. And in 1992, I felt ready to try this mountain. And I went with a friend of mine from Seattle. This is Scott Fisher. We were teammates. We go to Pakistan and we joined a group of climbers that were already there. We tried to collectively work together because this mountain is relentless, 45 degrees on average from bottom to top. And knowing that we're going to go up and down this dangerous terrain day after day after day with heavy loads, we fix rope into the ice and the rock that gives us a handline of safety. This is a typical camp on K2, very precarious. We have to build a platform. You know, it's 45 degrees and you have to build a platform. We had storms, we had avalanches, we had rescues. Everything that I'd read that K2 could do, prepared myself for, it happened. 2.5 months into that event, most of the people on the mountain gave up and went home. They ran out of patience, they ran out of motivation. They weren't prepared for how hard this was going to be. And Scott and myself, we stayed and we stayed and we waited and we waited. And we finally had what we thought was a window of weather to once again go back up the mountain. And on this particular trip, we finally got to Camp 4, 26,000 feet. We brought everything with us. We spent the night, 5-pound tent, very small. You gotta make things lighter so you make them smaller. These tents are about the size of a single bed. But tomorrow we thought would be the hardest day of one of our careers, climbing to the summit of K2, 2,000 feet of very steep technical climbing. This mountain is relentless. So you go to bed that final night, you know, tomorrow's like our Super Bowl, it's our gold medal. But we're not in the Four Seasons getting a massage with a buffet table, right? We're crammed in this tiny little tent, anxiously waiting for the alarm to go off. And we set the alarm for midnight, because we wanted to be out the door at 1 o'clock in the morning. And once again, in the night, yet another storm came onto the mountain. And it dumped 3 feet of snow onto us that night. And this is what we woke up to. Horrendous conditions. There was no way we could possibly attempt the summit. And we had a conversation. We thought, what do we do now? Well, maybe we should go down, go all the way back to base camp, to safety. And we thought if we did that, we're not going to make it back up here. So we decided to stay there and to wait in this very, very tiny little claustrophobic tent. And together there, we stayed for 3 days. What do you do for 3 days? No iPhones, no books, no music. I've been with Scott for 3 months, nothing left to talk about. And you think you're just laying there, you're getting stronger, you're resting, but in fact, you're in the area known as the death zone. You're actually dying slowly by the minute. So it is a race against time. And after 3 days, were we going to be strong enough to actually attempt the summit? And I said, man, it's mind over matter. If you don't mind, it doesn't matter, right? And our patience paid off. 3 days later, the weather window came. We were at the right place at the right time. And when that opportunity came, we took advantage of it. And from that camp, then it took 10 hours for us to reach the summit of K2. That was one of the hardest events of my career. And what I learned from K2 was how to be relentless, how to be patient, and how to be comfortable being uncomfortable, right? When you're cold and you're tired and it's taking too long, you can't complain about it because that's part of what you're doing. And that's what I learned about from K2. So I now climbed the 3 highest mountains in the world, kind of by accident. And I thought to myself, what do I want to do now? And I actually came to a fork in the road of my career. I was still, believe it or not, trying to work as a veterinarian. I was employed by 2 people at 2 different clinics, and also always asking for 3 months off to go climbing. How long do you think that's going to last? So I had to make a decision. What do I want to do? And I can't do both things well. What do I want to do well? And I made what I thought was the riskiest business decision in my career, and that was to walk away from my career as a veterinarian and focus on climbing. And I thought, wow, how am I going to do that? And it's basically like a startup, right? You leave a comfortable job, a good income, security, and you decide to walk away with what you've learned and take it and start something new and start at zero. And that's basically what I did. And my goal at this point became the thing that I decided to do. I wanted to go climb all 14 of the 8,000 meter peaks as a goal. 10 years, 15 years, I didn't know how long it would take. And I figured I'd done 3, there's only 11 left. And I called it Endeavor 8,000. I had to kind of verbalize it. And the hardest part for me was not going to be the climbing or the logistics, but it was the business part of how do I now support myself as a climber. Nobody's going to send me money to go climbing mountains. I've got to work for the money. So I had relationships with a lot of outdoor companies and a couple of startups like Expedia, Mountain Zone. And I said to them, listen, you invest in me, you give me an annual retainer, and in return, I will work for you. As long as your investor sees a payback, they'll create long-term relationships. And that's what I did. And that's how I earned my money. 9 months of the year, I was working for all of these companies so that 3 months of the year, I could go climbing. And it was the hardest thing to do. It took a long time before I had any cash flow. And since most of the money comes from marketing, you end up looking like a race car driver, right? You got the logos and the caps and the flags. And so that's the business of being a professional mountaineer. And then I went out and said, who am I going to do another 10 or 15 years of climbing with to do all the rest of these 14 peaks? And I thought maybe I could do it with one other person, right? 2 people make a team. And what's the criteria for me for that perfect partner? Number 1, I have to like you. Because if I don't like you at sea level, I'm not going to like you at 26,000 feet. And implicit trust, right? We're roped together. We have to trust each other. And so I did some mountaineering dating, you might say, hit or miss. And I finally bumped into a guy. This is a guy from Finland named Viesturs Gustafsson. And we got to know each other. We liked each other. We trusted each other. And then he and I partnered up for the next 10 years, just the 2 of us. No Sherpa, no oxygen, no support, going out to climb these giant 8,000 meter peaks. And it was a lot of fun. And we knew how to be frugal and knew how to minimize what we took because we're carrying every single ounce by ourselves. You know, we cut the straps off our packs to make them shorter. We shared a sleeping bag to save weight. And we went on these amazing adventures together. But sometimes we found ourselves in the middle of nowhere on a giant 8,000 meter peak all by ourselves. And we had to remember that we were alone. There was no chance of rescue. If something happened, we would have to help each other. Every decision had a consequence. And because of that, we were extremely conservative and very, very well prepared. And in the end, I think we had a great track record. For every 3 expeditions that we went on, 2 out of 3 were successful. And in the Himalaya, that's really good. What I'm more proud about was, though, we never had an accident, I never needed a rescue, never got frostbite, and never lost a climbing partner. And that's the thing I'm the most proud about. We did have some glitches, right? 1 out of 3, something happened. This is a mountain in Pakistan called Broad Peak. We spent 2 months on this mountain, and on our way to the summit finally, we were forced to stop 100 feet from the summit based on dangerous avalanche conditions. And we stopped and we turned around. And you can imagine at this point, I'm well into my career now. I'm climbing along all these 14 peaks, and I have now what's called external expectation and external pressure. The media is following me. The fans are following me. I'm wanting to be done. And very importantly, I have the sponsors that are also hoping that I'm successful. All of those things can trickle into your mindset and change how you think about what you're doing, because then you end up doing something for others rather than for yourselves. And I saw a lot of that in my peer group. We're also in this environment of constant risk, and you can become complacent. Day in and day out, you're on that fine line between safety and danger, and it's that one day you think, you know what? I'm going to break my rule today. I'm going to get home earlier. I'm going to save some money. I'm going to take a shortcut. I'm going to finish in spite of the risk. And once you step over that edge, you might never come back. And I had to put blinders on to prevent me from thinking about what others thought rather than how I wanted to do it. Still willing to walk away, knowing that I'd go home, come back, try again a year later, and we climbed that mountain. A year later, we climbed that last 100 feet. So patience was the key to doing this. If it doesn't happen today, it doesn't mean it won't happen tomorrow. You pull back, you regroup, and you try again. So I kept going, peak after peak, multiple trips to Nepal, Pakistan, Tibet, beautiful adventures. And eventually, after 17 years into this project, I had climbed 13 of the 14 peaks, and I had 1 mountain left on my list. Lo and behold, Annapurna. Remember the book I read as a kid? This would now be my final peak. And people often thought, oh, you left it for the end, just have a cool story. And I said, no, I had actually tried that mountain twice earlier in my career. This is one dangerous mountain, off the charts. Objectively, the most dangerous Himalayan mountain out there. Only 180 people had climbed it. 60 had died. That's a 1 out of 3. And I had tried Annapurna twice, and both times ran away, scared to death, thinking, oh my God, what do I do? This mountain was too dangerous for me. And I thought, man, don't die on Annapurna, because that will not look good on your resume, right? And I almost convinced myself not to go back, to be happy with 13 out of the 14, right? And it didn't matter if I didn't do it. Nobody cared. I cared, but nobody else cared. There's no gold medal. There's no trophy. There's no bonus check. But me being me, I thought, I've got to go back. I've got to try one more time. And the promise that Veka and I made to everyone, and my wife included, was that we would go back to Annapurna and we would sit at the bottom of it and listen to it, because it would tell us what to do. Go or no go. We couldn't do it at home. We'd have to be looking face to face at the mountain. And believe it or not, my wife allowed me to do this. We'd been married at that point for 10 years. We have 2 kids. And she never once said no. She let me go. She believed in me. She trusted me. And to have somebody at home like that, when you go to work, when you walk out the door, that person elevates you, right? That person lightens your load. That person is part of your team. So Vake and I go, this is the spring of 2005, our third trip to Annapurna together. We sit at the bottom, we watch that mountain, we listen to it. Conditions were absolutely phenomenal. It was colder that year, it was drier. No avalanche activity to speak of. Only then and there did we make the decision to go for it. It was not an easy climb, but we were a partnership. You know, we had hours and hours of non-verbal communication, but we still knew what the other was thinking. And finally, in the end, on May 12, 2005, together, we then stepped on the summit of Annapurna. For me, this was literally a dream come true, a moment that I'd been thinking about for 18 years, and I was finally there, you know, and I felt mostly proud about how I did it, you know, how I treated people along the way, how I conducted myself, hopefully with respect and humility, and the fact that it was all self-motivated, self-funded. You know, I didn't quit, I didn't get injured, I survived it. And then looking back on it, why was Annapurna at the end? It had to be. I needed 30 years of experience to climb it and climb it in the right way and succeed and survive. And I think you all will have something in your careers that will come to you and you'll say, I'm ready for this today. I might not have been ready for it 5 years ago, but today I am ready. And that was for me, the Annapurna at that time. And then full circle, poetically, this book that put me on the path to climbing all the peaks and eventually climbing Annapurna. So I'm going to leave you now with the last sentence of this book. This book changed my life. And it was written by the leader of this climb, Maurice Herzog, here pictured on the summit. And the very last sentence of the book, he says,